What's going on, everyone? My name is Alex Ramosi. I'm the CEO and founder of Allen Prestige Labs, Gym Launch, and we own a portfolio of other companies. We've done 120 plus million in the last 4 years. In this video, what I want to do is show you the 8 principles Charlie Munger taught me to succeed in business and life. And by no means am I saying that I have completely executed all these things in my life. These are just aspirational things that I think benefit most humans. For those of you who know me, I'm a huge fan. I've consumed a lot of his materials, and so I wanted to consolidate his speeches and his work into these principles for anyone who's kind of new to Charlie Munger. And so I'm not going to do these in order. I'm going to do these in the order that I think it makes the most sense to present them. The first one is invert, always invert. And so he references Johnny Carson in one of his speeches to always try and solve problems in reverse. And this has been something that's been immensely powerful, I think, because for us, using thinking frameworks in order to make decisions, in order to solve problems as both, entrepreneurs, business people, and then just in daily life, so many times we try and solve it logically going forward towards it, and it gives you this entirely fresh perspective to start at what you don't want and then try and solve from that direction. And that'll kind of lead way into the other the other 7. Of the lessons. And at the very end, I'll give you the one thing that just from the things that we've done that I would add to the list that has been really helpful for us, or rather things to avoid. So his first thing that you hear him talk about all the time is just don't ingest chemicals to alter your state, right? He's like, I've never heard of someone, like if I wanted to be really poor or really unsuccessful in life, what would I do? He's like, well, I would definitely get addicted to chemicals, right? And so this sounds so logical, like obvious to us, but instead so many of us still use that stuff on a regular basis to alter our mood because we can't cope with some of the issues that are coming up in our lives. And he's like, I can't imagine anyone who's thought to themselves, man, my life is so much better now that because I do drugs and because I drink. And I'm not saying that, that's a judgment in any way. It's just one of the principles that he's found to be a successful trait for himself and others. Number 3, envy. So one of the things that's been a gift for Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger together is this statement that they made, both of them being, super billionaires, and they said every single year someone is doing better than us. And for me, that was so gut wrenching is the wrong word, but that hit me because I think I am innately so competitive that I suffer from comparison all the time. I was actually texting a friend this morning who's also a multi-billionaire, decabillionaire, and he was saying, he's like, I feel like the more money I make, the poorer I feel. And it's totally true, because what ends up happening is that your measuring stick changes. I remember, when I was really, really young, my measuring stick for money was Chipotle burritos. It was just how many Chipotle burritos does this amount of money equate to? And so I actually think that we have like a stick or a unit that becomes our base unit when we're measuring wealth for ourselves. And that's why when I think I had $100,000 in my bank account, that was probably the wealthiest I have ever felt, because I had, proportional to what my measuring stick was, which at that time was still meals, $100,000 was so much money, so many of those units. At this point in my life, $1 million is kind of my measuring unit that I use as a base unit for how many of these do I have in this? How many sticks do I have in real estate? How many sticks do I have in my portfolio? How much do I have in equity in these companies, etc.? And so that stick changes, but someone is always doing better. But I think it's so much more about not thinking about them, because the way that they roll the dice and play the game has no effect on us. And so simply, it's an imaginary way to make yourself suffer. So if you want to suffer, definitely be envious of people. The 4th one was definitely resent people, like really hold on to resentment if you want to be miserable. And so one of the stories that Charlie tells is of a king who, trying to not be resentful of people, what he would do is every time he'd want to resent someone, he'd write their name down and he'd put it on a slip of paper in a drawer. And periodically he'd go to that drawer, open it up and read the names and realize how life had dealt with those people without him having to do anything. And so I think it's one of those long-term mindedness that most people live in karmic balance, independent of whether or not you believe in that kind of woo-woo stuff. But simply, people who do bad things, eventually that catches up to them and it is worse for them. And so someone who exists in that state is already dealing with the suffering of being who they are. And so, if you want to be miserable, definitely resent people. The next one is be unreliable. right? Like if you want to definitely be miserable, like be unreliable. Say you're going to do something and don't do it. Say you're going to be somewhere and be late. Be flaky. Make commitments that you don't keep. And this one is one of those ones that he references a lot of times as, he's like, if you just get this one right and you are reliable, it's very difficult to be miserable. It's very difficult to be unsuccessful. And there was a guy that I knew in high school, and this is when I had a bigger ego than I have now. And I was such a dick. I was just, there's no other way to say it. I just was. And this kid was just like, he went to all the extra credit for teachers. He worked so hard and he had nothing going for him. Like he wasn't like the best looking kid. He wasn't athletic. Like he didn't have like this natural processing power. He wasn't quick like that. But I remember, and I was such a mean guy to this kid. And I remember one time we got in some sort of spat, and I was like, in what world will you ever be better than me at anything? And I remember saying that, and you can feel it's so dripped in ego, and it's just kind of disgusting. But anyways, I said this to him, and he ended up getting into a better college than me. I ended up going to Vanderbilt. He ended up going to Duke. And I just remembered that moment because it was such a deep lesson for me that like, he was more reliable than I was. He was more long-suffering than I was. He was more consistent than I was. He showed up to every teacher's thing. He showed up, he did all the extra credit. He did all the homework. He did all those things, and he just showed up. And that was a huge lesson for me that I was like, if I can just show up like that guy does, like, man, things will open up for me. But if you want to fail, definitely be unreliable. The next one is overspend your income. Definitely if you want to put yourself in a horrible situation on a regular basis and consistently have stress, definitely spend more than you make, which America is doing right now with their own GDP, but we won't even get into that. But definitely overspend what you make. Like don't save, spend more than what you have, always have bigger aspirations than you have the ability to fulfill on, and definitely always live in debt. And the wrong kind of debt, the bad debt. And so if you've followed any of my stuff, I'm a huge proponent of living broke all the time. And it's because I believe wealth is a ratio between income and expenses. It's not a number, right? If you can live on 1% of what you make, as a hypothetical example, then you are infinitely wealthy because you already have 100 times more. Your income is 100 times more than your expenses, which means you could live veritably for 100 years. And so just on 1 year's income. So that's an extreme example just to illustrate the point. But if you for me, I feel less and less anxiety the greater the percentages of excess I have in my expenditures versus how I live. And so there's two ways to get there. One is you can increase how much you make. The other is you can decrease how much you spend. But the thing is no matter where you are right now, the one that you can immediately change is how much you spend. Over time, you can use those extra funds, invest in yourself, grow the top line so that you can even make that discrepancy crazier so that your wealth can increase. That ratio being your wealth can increase. And so for me, I try and live on 10%. That $100,000 story that I gave you earlier, once I had $1 million in my bank account, I still lived on $30,000 a year. And so I was living on 3% at that point of my wealth, but my income was already surpassing $1 million a year at that point. And so, I was living on 3% of what I was taking home. And honestly, I felt so free because I just knew that I had way more money than I would ever need. That's very freeing. So, but if you want to fail, definitely overspend your income. The next one is learn only from your own mistakes, right? Don't learn from the mistakes of others. Don't learn from other people's successes. And what I want to add as a wrinkle to this is that depending on where you're at in your journey, this is something that I've observed is in the very, very beginning, you have no value to offer. I get messages frequently of people being like, hey, let's start a business together. I'll give you half. And I'm like, well, you're providing no value. I'm the one who would know how to run this business. So this is not a good trade for me. Return on my time is not very good. Another one is, hey, I'll work with you. I'll work for you for free. If you teach me everything. And I was like, yeah, so I'm getting someone who has no skills and no value. In exchange, you're getting an education from someone, that's not a good exchange for me. Right. And so what you have to do is find ways where even that you can trade your base level, which is time, for someone who has a need for that level of skill who's ahead of you. And that's where like small businesses, like if someone's making $100,000 a year or $200,000 a year in a business, that's not a very big business. But if you say, I will work for free for you, then someone like that can still use, for lack of a better term, just hands, right? Someone who can just help and just be there as a body. And I know that may sound diminutive towards you, but if you have no base skills, that is your base skill that you have, is you have your time in your hands, right? And so you use that, and then you can learn some more skills. And then from that point, you develop the next level, which is where you can start affording coaches, right? From the level above that, when I say learning only from your own mistakes, first is you learn from people for free by exchanging your time. Then you learn from coaches. Then you can learn from masterminds, which is people where you are now at this point equal with other people in the room who are good. And what I will tell you is this: if you're at 8 figures, I'm switching gears in terms of who I'm talking to, but as you go up this journey, how you network and learn from others changes, it evolves. And I went the coach route for the first 3-4 years of my entrepreneurial journey, and then it was much more towards the mastermind route later on. But the thing is once we passed 8 figures for us in terms of yearly revenue and yearly income, it's shifted to being much more about networking and advisors. So that's kind of 2 different things. Networking is like other people who are at that level that you just network with and you meet at things and you donate to the same charities, that kind of thing. And the other aspect is like, well, if you want someone ahead of you at that point, a lot of times, you can still get it from the network sometimes, but if you really want to get a lot from someone, you need to make sure that there's some sort of exchange that's fair. And that's where kind of advisory relationships work really well. And so I have an advisor, and that means they get a minority percentage in something that you guys are working on. And so they have an incentive to teach you some of these elements. And you at this point, you're already proven as an effective person. You have the character traits of being reliable, not being envious, having long suffering, having the abilities to execute. So they know that they can just drop the information in and then it will be incorporated and then they can succeed with you. And then the final aspect is what I would say the highest level is heroes. Because a lot of people we don't have access to, you know what I mean? Even this video right now, like I don't know Charlie Munger. I have not met Charlie Munger, but Charlie Munger is a hero of mine. And so I feel like I've been directly mentored by Charlie, despite the fact that I've never met the man. And so I'm eternally grateful for the man because he's, significantly changed my life for the better. Which will naturally lead me to his last point, and then I'll give you the one that I would add just from my own experience in my life. So his last point would be quit when you have your 3rd or 4th big failure in life. He said, so if you want to fail and you want to be miserable, you should definitely quit soon, quit early, right? He's like, because no matter who you are, you're going to fail not just once or twice or 3 times or 4 times, but you will fail many times. And if you quit early, then you can guarantee that you will be miserable for a very long time after that, because then you'll have given up hope and you'll have nothing to strive towards and you'll have no purpose. And so if you want to be miserable, definitely quit early, right? And even count the amount of times you failed because for some reason that means something, right? It doesn't mean anything. And so to wrap this up, I'll give you Alex's one that's been tremendously helpful for me, which is, this is kind of started from a speech I heard one of the presidents say from the past, but was the way to be successful is to be able to handle pressure, right? So if you want to fail, definitely crack under pressure. Like no matter what happens, just crack under pressure. Crack when people need you. And so my candid solution for this, or the things that have helped me, is understanding what it is, which is most of us just create arbitrary expectations and then crumble under pressures that we put on ourselves that don't actually exist in the world. We literally create things to weigh ourselves down, which I feel like the further along you get in the entrepreneurial game, it becomes headier and headier because you realize it's so much just about the limits that you place on yourself. And so here's 3 strategies that I have used that have mentally made me much more resilient. The first, and I got this from Trevor, who got it from Epictetus, which is an ancient philosopher, is negative visualization. And so let me give you a tactical example of that. This is a simple example. So I just spent a couple $100s on a shirt, and I really like the shirt, and I don't really spend money a lot on clothing. And after I washed the shirt, it was like messed up. I'll just put it simply, right? This is a simple example to illustrate. And then he had just taught me about this negative visualization the day before. And he said, take something that happens negative and then imagine it happening 1,000 more times in a row. How would you feel in the 1,000th time? And I thought to myself, if every time I washed a shirt, it shrunk like this or something, or it became rougher around the edges and I got it because it was soft, I probably wouldn't care that much. It would just be like, oh, that's just how these things are. And so what it means is that my expectations would change in my mind to match reality, and then at that point my misery would disappear. And so that's literally what I did in the moment, And I felt myself just stop caring about this thing that actually bugged me a little bit because I was like, man, that's annoying. But you can use that same concept with any of the things that occur in your life when it's like, man, my wife said this thing. Well, what if she said that thing 1,000 times in a row? We'd be like, well, I guess that's just kind of how she is, or that's just kind of how things are. And then all of a sudden, you would acclimate it, but you can rapidly force the acclimation to stress by visualizing it happening thousands of times and then skipping to the end, because if you can feel that way after 1,000 times, then you might as well feel that way after the first time. And that has been so powerful for me because we have so many stressors that come in our lives and we set expectations that we're even not aware that we're setting and then get underperformed on. The second thing that's been really helpful for me is that if I want to start a new behavior or I'm trying to do something that is difficult, then what I want to do is go into it and expect the worst. And let me give you that sounds obvious, but let me give you a realistic reasoning for this. So let's say that you want to start working out. Mentally prepare yourself for the fact that every time I work out, I'm going to be tired. Every time I work out, I'm going to not be motivated. And that's just going to be my base reality. If I happen to be motivated, or I happen to not be exhausted, or I happen to not have a lot of work to do, then that's just a bonus. It's serendipitous. It's just a happy coincidence. But I expect that every time I work out, I will be tired, I'll have more things to do, and I will not, be motivated to do so. And if I come in with that expectation and I set that as my baseline, then I am not surprised when I go to work out and I feel that way, because then it is in alignment with the expectations that I have in my mind. The third of the subtext of creating false expectations and crumbling under pressures that we create for ourselves is one that will probably be controversial for some of you, but this is a belief that I hold, and it has been immensely powerful for me in terms of increasing my joy in life, which is Elon Musk. I heard him talk a while back about how he said eventually the universe will expand infinitely until everything becomes a fine mist. Everything just becomes a fine mist if you extend the time horizon long enough. And for me, that means that everything that we create on Earth and as humanity will eventually disappear. So the skyscrapers, the books that I write, the people that we help, people who remember us, the legacy that we are trying to have after we die, even that will eventually turn into a fine mist and not matter. And for me, that is so immensely powerful because it means that nothing matters, and at the same time, it means that we get to choose what things we create meaning with. And so I believe our brains are simply meaning-making machines, and I love that term, so I'm giving it to you. Is that just I have this meaning-making machine in my mind, which everything has no meaning, and then I can choose to highlight aspects that I will create meaning for. And so understanding that the millions that I have, maybe the billions that I'll make in my lifetime, and the wealth that I accumulate, the reputation, the books, the impact, all of that stuff will eventually disappear. Truly. It will eventually be gone. There will be a day where no one knows that I existed or anything like that. In some ways, it frees me in the present knowing that everything that I do will eventually mean nothing. And so all of us are essentially, in my mind, there's the Nazi concentration camps. People would dig holes and then they'd fill holes back up again. And it was basically meaningless work. But it was only meaningless because they believed that it was meaningless, right? But essentially all of us, in my own mind and my understanding of reality, are simply just digging holes every day that will eventually, when the time horizon is long enough, get filled back with dirt. And so what that means is, imagine I was in that same concentration camp, for example, which might be an analogy for life. And instead of being given a shovel to dig holes, they said you can do whatever you want, but at the end of your life, you have to undo it all, right? Well, then I could probably engineer a fairly joyful experience for myself because I would do things that are stimulating for me and that I find enjoyable, right? And so by doing that, it just removed all of the expectations and a lot of the envy that I have for other people, because I know that all of us, in the end, there's no box that we take with us, right? And so that's just been wildly impactful for me as a human being. And in terms of decreasing pressure in my life, in business, there's just nothing that's that big of a deal, right? Because eventually all of it's going to disappear anyways. So if someone's upset with you, it's like, well, we're all going to become a fine mist in the future eventually. We've got this competitor who's stealing our stuff. We're all going to disappear into a fine mist eventually. And that has been so calming for me and has relieved so much pressure for me mentally. That may be depressing for some people. For me, it's wildly freeing. And so I guess if it's depressing for you, then don't think about it. But if that resonates with you, then maybe you can use that as a weapon in your arsenal to defend against the pressures that we inevitably put on ourselves that we can deconstruct and deflate. And so anyways, those are the lessons that I have learned from Charlie Munger as my hero and mentor from consuming so much of his content. I hope you found value in that. If you're a business owner, I make a lot of more tactical things about how to make money and all this stuff on this channel. If you like this stuff, click and subscribe. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you on the next video.